New polling shows President Trump's approval rating continues to drop. The latest Pew Research Center poll has President Trump's approval rating at 37%, the lowest of his second term. The poll shows him deeply underwater among key demographics. He's down 45 points among Hispanic voters, down 48 points among Asian voters, down 39 points among voters age 18 to 29. The poll also showing President Trump appears to be losing his own base. Only 66% of Republicans believe he has the mental fitness needed to be president. 52% of Republicans believe he respects the country's democratic values, and only 42% of Republicans believe he acts ethically in office. Who are those 42, and do they watch what's happening right now? It's my question, Donnie.
Yeah, those poll numbers are pretty stunning. 37% is about as low as he's been in either term. And a lot of it, I believe, has to do with what's going on in Minneapolis. This is the first time I've heard so many Trump voters say to me, and I'm surrounded by a lot of Trump voters, you know, this is a bridge too far. This is something that they've always been defending him. This just feels so un-American, so inhumane. And I think that on top of that, and the fact that we're not seeing the inflation numbers move a lot, I think they've gone from 3% to 2.7%. Those two issues, I think, are really, really hurting him. But I think the zeitgeist, and I'm going to bring it back to the Georgia story. I think it's no coincidence that happened now to defer attention away from. This is a losing issue. 60% of all voters say there's been too much of extreme use by ICE. They don't want to see them there. And I'm surprised last night the president doubled down after he seemed to be pulling back a little bit. That was very surprising. Politically, I don't understand that move.
Gene Robinson, it was just about a year ago after the 2024 election that people on shows like this and all over the country were talking about a potential sea change because of the groups that Donald Trump seemed to have begun to won over in his election victory. Hispanic voters, black voters, Asian American voters, younger voters. And now if you look at these numbers from Pew, they've all come back to where they were before the election or even lower than that. I mean, he won 46% of Hispanic voters in the 2024 election, now polling at 26%. He was way up with young voters and Asian voters and has come back down. So the Wall Street Journal had a piece yesterday about how many young voters, for example, kind of took a flyer this time. Maybe they didn't like Kamala Harris. They didn't like the state of the economy, and now regretting that vote, and that's showing up in the polls.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has done everything he could possibly do to drive those voters away. He really has. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise that Hispanic voters have given him the big adios. It's just amazing as they look at his immigration policies, as they watch him, breaking people's car windows and dragging them out into the streets and taking a 5-year-old boy into custody. Not just Hispanic voters, but I agree with Donnie. I think people across the country see what's been happening in Minnesota and are just simply horrified and feel and feel angry that this is effectively being done in our name, in the name of the American people, by the American government. That's wrong, and I think that poll reflects how wrong it is.
And Frank Foer, it's not just that he's losing the support of those who gave him a try in 2024, those groups that Eugene was just outlining, but this poll reflects something we very rarely see, which is part of Trump's own base seems to be, if not abandoning him, but at least questioning him, his ability for the job, and certainly the direction his policies have taken. Talk to us about what's striking to you about that, particularly as we are now barreling towards the midterms.
Right. I mean, this is to use the Obama era way that this question was always framed. It's like, when is the fever going to break? And those poll numbers suggest that the fever is breaking if such a significant part of, or at least temporarily, that such a significant part of his base believes that he's acting in an undemocratic sort of way. I think the numbers on foreign policy are incredibly interesting within that poll. And it's not just the dissolution of the Trump coalition. I think for Democrats, in the short term, that these numbers suggest reasons to be very optimistic about what's coming up in the midterm elections. When I talk to Democrats about how the Senate is playing out, I think that there is this sense that in places like Alaska and maybe even Texas, you're going to have hardcore Republican states that are suddenly in play. But I think what I take away from this, which I find pretty disheartening, is that there is probably a lot of wisdom in the pessimism that these voters are talking about. There may be short-term political reasons to be optimistic if one cares about American democracy, but I think that what the poll numbers suggest is that the pessimism about our institutions, about our economic trajectory, about our place in the world, about our ability to recover from all of the traumas that have been inflicted upon it is not high with reason.
A recent column by Kimberly Strassel in the Wall Street Journal entitled Trump's Cowbell Moment reads in part this: alarm has gripped Washington's GOP as a White House, never famed for focus, has become obsessed with a few priorities, ones no longer doing Republicans any good. Poll after poll shows Americans are gloomy about the economy and want Washington to focus on growth, prices, affordability, jobs. Day after day, the Trump administration instead rides harder its hobby horse of immigration and tariffs. Congressional and conservative Republicans have been fiercely lobbying the White House to get its priorities straight. One message to Mr. Trump: your advisor's monomaniacal focus on zero-tolerance immigration policy is now actively doing you and us harm. A second, we need all attention focused on our next economic steps. A third, this is handing Democrats too many gift-wrapped wins. And Donnie, you know, I couldn't agree more. And yet, the Democratic playbook should be what? I'm thinking they need to be multi-focused. Obviously, affordability. Obviously, housing. Obviously, the economy. That would be number one. That would be the message. But what about election security? Given some major signs of concern, I think one can ascertain right now.
Look, election security is so worrisome to all of us, and it should be. I don't think that's the message, though. The democracy didn't work as a message last time. You have gift wrap right here. You have, number one, an issue on immigration that is so universally hurting him. And the way you frame it, because you have to come back to housing and health care and jobs, and is he's focusing on that. He's not focusing on you. Look at what he's doing there. You're miserable about this, but this is what he's not doing for you. He's not handling inflation. He's not lowering costs. He's not dealing with health care. And on top of that, step three, the Democrats have to have a message, and this is what we're going to do. That's the message they never had before. This is the way we solve the problem. But you have to bring it back to the voter. We can no longer just be, look at Trump there, look at Trump there, look at Trump there. It's got to be, look, Trump there. This is not happening for you, and we're going to make it happen.
It's interesting. Democrats I've talked to say, you know, they were so laser focused on affordability last year and plan to be again, but they feel like the immigration stuff, they have to incorporate.
You tie them together.
You have to incorporate it.
Well, they impact the economy.
In some way.
Businesses are shutting down.
They do.
Losing
messages. This is what he's focused on. He's not focused on.
And to that point, Frank Foer, the argument could also be made, maybe not by Democrats, but by others. Maybe Trump voters will feel this. Well, hey, he's focused on other things, not me. What's something else he's been focused on? International affairs to a remarkable degree. You know, Venezuela, Greenland, and now there's a pretty steady drumbeat suggesting that the U.S. may be moving to do something with Iran sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe yesterday in this New York Times story, I think a lot of public attention was not focused on the very real possibility of an imminent attack on Iran. I think, you know, for a week, the Israeli press has been reporting that the IDF has been raising their own alert levels because, in their estimation, there's an extreme likelihood that Trump is committed to an attack. He's capricious. He could back away. But I think that politically, none of this is making sense to voters because he's madly trying to justify Greenland, madly trying to justify Venezuela. But I think what the poll numbers suggest is it just doesn't add up in the voters' minds.
Yeah, I think some of them didn't think he actually might have been completely serious about what mass deportations would look like as well, which is, it's all very shocking and really scary for a lot of Americans. Staff writer at The Atlantic, Frank Foer, thank you very much. And